They unplugged my oxygen to charge their phones, so I left them a shocking clause in my will, the one they wouldn't see coming until it was read aloud. The click came first, small, almost polite, like the end of a sentence. Then came the hollow silence that followed, the air around me tightening as the faint hum of my oxygen machine disappeared. I did not need to open my eyes to know what had happened. I could feel the sudden weight in my chest, the heaviness spreading through me like cold water seeping into cracks. And then came the sound of him, my son Ethan. That sharp, dismissive laugh of his, low and bitter, cut through the room like a knife drawn over glass. "Mom does not even use half the stuff she plugs in," he said, the smugness dripping from every word. "She just lies there, wasting power." The sound of plastic scraping against tile told me what he had done. He had unplugged my oxygen line to charge his phone, my air exchanged for his battery life. Before I could process that cruelty, the door flew open and Lena's voice shot across the room like lightning. "Dad, are you out of your mind? You just unplugged Grandma's oxygen." There was the shuffle of shoes, the clatter of a phone hitting the table. I could feel the heat of anger rolling off her voice. "You could have killed her." Ethan scoffed. "It's just for a little while. Stop being dramatic." But Lena would not stop. "She needs that oxygen to breathe," he replied, so casually it twisted my stomach. "If she stops, she stops. The insurance will cover it." My hand trembled. My lungs tightened as I tried to draw air from the nothing left in the line. I could feel the seconds stretch, my heart pushing harder to make up for the missing breath. Through the haze, I could hear Lena's sharp inhale, disbelief filling the room. "You're talking about your mother," she said. "Your own mother." He let out a dry laugh. "You think I don't know that? Do you know what happens when people die with an active life insurance policy, Lena? They leave behind something useful." That was when the pain in my chest became more than physical. It was the kind of pain that only betrayal can carve, a deep, wordless ache that feels too old to be new and too fresh to be forgotten. "My name is Helen Graves. I used to be an accountant. I spent 40 years balancing other people's numbers, making sure nothing ever went missing. But no one teaches you how to balance something like this the moment when your own child decides that your breath is worth less than his phone charge." Lena's voice softened, breaking into something that almost sounded like a sob. "You're sick, Dad," she whispered. "Completely sick." Ethan's chair creaked. I imagined him leaning back, shrugging, still holding his phone. "You're too soft. She's been lying here for months, costing us thousands. Maybe this is just how it's supposed to go." Lena's shoes scraped closer to me. I felt the warmth of her hand brushing mine. She was trembling, but steady. "Hang on, Grandma," she whispered. "I've got you." I wanted to tell her that I was still here, that I heard every word, but my lips would not part, and my lungs had turned against me. All I could do was listen, the most helpless act of all. If you feel justice deserves celebration, smash that hype button. Let us keep stories like this alive, echoing far, far away. Your support helps us bring understanding and love to those who deserve it. Thank you so much. Keep listening. Ethan's voice turned cold again. "I owe $20,000, Lena. 20,000. You have no idea what that kind of pressure feels like. Atlantic City doesn't wait forever, so if she goes early, we finally get a break." Lena stepped between us, her voice shaking with fury. "You think she's a break? She's your mother." For a moment, no one spoke. Only the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. I could feel my pulse echoing in my ears, desperate, uneven. I stared at the shape of my son through the haze of pain and disbelief. He would not even meet my eyes, and somehow that was worse than what he'd done. When he finally spoke again, his voice was distant, almost bored. "Look at her. She's barely here. All she does is breathe and cost money." I wanted to scream, to pull the cord myself, and show him what life and death truly meant. But instead, I did what I had always done best. I stayed silent and remembered every word, every cruel laugh, every justification. I would remember, and one day, when the time was right, I would let the silence speak for me. Because this silence was not weakness, it was gathering strength. I was not always lying in hospital beds, breathing through machines, waiting for permission to exist. Once, I was the woman who brought order to other people's chaos. I kept numbers aligned, bills paid, and food on the table, even when that table was shared by 3 hungry children and a husband with fading health. I worked spreadsheets by day and folded laundry by night. I stayed up through chickenpox, prom nights, lost jobs, and broken hearts. When I retired at 65, I sold our home and split the proceeds evenly between Ethan, his brother, and his sister. I kept enough to rent a small apartment near the park. I told them it was time for them to build their lives without worrying about mine. I thought I had given them peace. But peace, it seems, has a short shelf life in some hearts. Ethan began telling people in the neighborhood that I had moved in with him because I could not handle being alone anymore, that I was clingy, that Mom is terrified of dying by herself, so now she's guilt-tripping us into caring for her. I heard this from a grocery clerk one day, someone I barely knew, who smiled as if she were offering sympathy. It felt like being gutted with a butter knife, slow and dull, but still fatal. At George's funeral, my husband, the man I buried with my bare hands and trembling knees, Ethan leaned over to his cousin and whispered just loud enough, "Look at her, not a single tear. Did she even love Dad?" He said it as if it were a clever observation, as if pain has only one script and one visible form. But I did cry, just not in the way he wanted. I cried through my fingers that gripped the edge of the coffin. I cried in the shower the night before, when I found his toothbrush still wet from that morning. I cried when I had to cancel his magazine subscription because the mailman kept delivering it with his name on top. But to Ethan, I was cold. And once a person decides you are cold, everything you do becomes evidence of it. Even your silence becomes a weapon in their version of your story. He would never admit how many times I helped pay his rent in his 20s, or how many bills I covered when he lost his job, or how I took care of his wife, Darla, when she had postpartum depression so severe she could not hold their baby. I moved in temporarily, made every meal, rocked that child to sleep while Ethan took time to clear his head in Vegas. The final blow came when my daughter Lena's mother died in a car accident after an overnight shift. She had been working long hours at the hospital, trying to pay off loans, still finishing her residency. Ethan looked me in the eye at her memorial and said, "If you had not pushed her to become a doctor, she would still be alive." That was the first time I ever slapped him. My hand shook for 10 minutes after, not from guilt, but from rage that I had not done it sooner. He held that slap like a trophy. From then on, every selfish word he spoke about me came with an asterisk. She hit me at my sister's funeral. No one ever asked why. I realized then that Ethan needed me to be a villain, not just for others, but for himself. He needed to believe that all the times I said no, all the times I gave tough love, all the times I refused to rescue him from his own laziness, it was not love, it was control. It is easier to abandon a monster than a mother. And so, the story of Helen Graves was rewritten, not in headlines or obituaries, but in whispered gossip and dinner-table eye rolls. The hard-working woman who once skipped meals to buy Ethan a guitar became Mom, the manipulative one. The woman who sold her wedding ring to help pay his mortgage became Mom, the martyr who never shuts up about sacrifices. The sad truth is, they cannot justify what they do to you until they turn you into someone who deserves it. That was the moment I understood something chilling. They were not neglecting me because they forgot who I was. They were neglecting me because they had convinced themselves I was no longer worth remembering. Coming home from the hospital should have felt like returning to safety. It had been 3 months since I was discharged. My body healed slower than my spirit, and both were growing tired in that house. But from the moment Ethan pulled the car into the driveway, something inside me sank. The sun was out, the grass was trimmed, the mailbox held a small flag, raised high like nothing in the world had gone wrong. Inside, the warmth disappeared. They had moved my things into the old utility room. It used to store broken Christmas decorations and a broken treadmill Ethan never used. Now, it had a twin mattress shoved into the corner, a thin sheet, and a floor lamp with a busted switch. There were no windows, no vents. The walls smelled of mildew and forgotten seasons. "This is temporary," Ethan said, shrugging. "Just until we get the guest room cleaned up." He never did. The door did not lock, and it did not close all the way either. Max, my grandson, a lanky 16-year-old with earbuds always in, called it Grandma's pod. He said it with a smirk, like it was a joke we were all supposed to laugh at. But I was not laughing. He once passed me in the hall and said, "Hey, you forgot to mute your breathing, Grandma. I'm trying to play online." I did not even know what that meant until I heard him call me the breathing screensaver to his friend over a headset. I ate separately from them. My tray would be left at the edge of the hallway. No warm meals, mostly instant soup, canned green beans, unheated oatmeal. I once found a best before date scratched off a can with marker. It tasted like rust and salt in memory. Darla, my daughter-in-law, never said anything cruel, but she never said anything at all. When I tried to speak, she always had her hands full grading papers, on the phone, folding laundry. "I'm just tired," she'd say with a sigh that felt rehearsed. What tired me was the silence. Not the kind that gives peace, but the kind that grows like mold in a place no one checks. Ethan was always watching bills. That was his new passion, calculating wattage, scolding anyone who left lights on. One night, he stood in my doorway holding the electric bill like a verdict. "This oxygen machine is pulling $60 a month," he said. "During peak hours, it's criminal." I nodded slowly, unsure what he expected. Apology? Gratitude? The next week, I woke up gasping. The machine was off. I reached for the wall. The plug was cold. I crawled to the extension cord and tried to reconnect it. When I finally did, the machine stuttered to life like it had been holding its breath too. Ethan walked past the door at that exact moment and muttered, "Could have waited until after 6 p.m. Like normal people." He said it without stopping, without looking. I began to write down every time it happened, every unplug, every skipped meal, every room I sat in without heat. It was not just cruelty. It was absence, curated like an art. No bruises, no screaming, just less and less of everything until I felt like a whisper inside my own body. Lena came on Saturdays. She brought warm soup from a cafe, asked questions Ethan avoided. "Why are you so tired, Grandma? Why are your hands shaking more?" I smiled like always. I said, "I'm just old." But she was not fooled. One day she sat beside me, and I saw her staring at the bruises on my shin. I had walked into a box someone moved near the bed. It had been there for days. No one moved it. She leaned in and whispered, "Do they check on you at night?" I shook my head. She clenched her fists. "I don't like this," she said. Neither did I. But I could not give her a reason to fight. Not yet. Not until I understood the shape of the storm forming around me. And then, it came to me quiet as dust collecting in a corner. They were not trying to kill me. They just wanted me less, quieter, smaller, dimmer. If I happened to stop breathing, that would be convenient. But if I lived, they would just turn the knob down a little more each day until I forgot how to speak. And that kind of dying? That kind does not leave evidence. That kind disappears you one breath at a time. It happened on a Tuesday. Ethan barged into the utility room, my pod, as Max still called it, grumbling about the vacuum being jammed. He kicked a box near the foot of my bed, the same box that held my backup oxygen tank. It tipped. Not dramatically, not violently, just enough. Enough to make it fall. The crash of metal meeting tile startled us both, but Ethan only muttered, "Shit," and walked away, already dialing his phone as he left. No apology, no pause to check. Just the sound of his boots fading down the hallway. The tank rolled, clanked once more, and stopped by my feet. At first, I tried to sit up. My legs, slow from the cold, and my lungs half empty, betrayed me. My hand reached for the mattress edge, but the sheets slipped. I tipped sideways and landed hard on the floor, my shoulder taking most of it. The machine wheezed, blinking red. I lay there on the cold tile, the oxygen hose twisted beneath me like a garden snake. I could not reach the call button. I whispered Ethan's name, then Max's. No one came. Max was in the next room, shouting into his headset at some game. "Bro, you're garbage. Do not push mid alone." I said do not. Darla was asleep on the couch, half buried in laundry and reruns. A sitcom's laugh track echoed through the walls as I lay on the floor, breath hitching in intervals. I stayed there for 20 minutes. Time does something strange when you are helpless. It stretches. Your mind plays tricks. At one point, I imagined George standing beside me, offering me his hand. I almost reached for him before I remembered he was buried 10 years ago. It was Lena who found me. She came early that day, said she had a feeling. She opened the door to the utility room and froze. "Grandma?" When I looked up, I saw her face shift from worry to fury in a single breath. "What happened?" I could not speak. My lips were dry. I pointed to the tank. She knelt beside me, checked my vitals, reattached the hose, and helped me sit up with more tenderness than anyone in that house had shown me in years. Then she stood, eyes blazing, and marched down the hallway. I heard her yell, "How long has she been on the floor?" Max shouted back, "I dunno. I had headphones on?" Darla's voice mumbled something unintelligible. A door slammed. Another laugh track from the TV filled the awkward quiet. Lena returned, shaking, her hands clenched. "I'm calling the police." I grabbed her wrist. "No," I rasped. "Not yet." She blinked. "Not yet? Grandma?" I squeezed her hand, weak but certain. "We don't call. We watch. We gather. We do this right." That was the night I began recording. I found an old digital voice recorder in one of the boxes they never unpacked. I hid it behind the books on my shelf, another under the side table near the kitchen, and one more behind a vent near the living room. I taught myself how to name the files, how to save them to Lena's cloud account. Every conversation, every careless joke, every sigh when I asked for a blanket. It did not take long. Ethan liked to talk when he drank. He would rant to Darla while pacing the hallway outside my room. "She should have died in that damn hospital. We could have had the money by now. She better not need another tank this month. I'm not paying for air." Darla never responded. Her silence, I recorded too. One night, as I scrolled through an old notebook Lena had brought me, I came across a list I had almost forgotten. It was from 6 years ago, a handwritten agreement, my signature next to hers. A contract. I had invested $30,000 in her startup when she was just 16, her first invention, a low-cost wearable medical sensor for seniors. She had pitched it in high school, and no bank would give her a loan. So I did. 30% ownership. I had forgotten because I never expected anything back. I was just proud of her. But Lena had not forgotten. "Your shares are still active," she said. "The company just closed its second funding round." I blinked. "I thought I gave it to you." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "You gave me trust, but you never gave up your stake." We sat together on the porch that evening, me wrapped in a blanket, her phone buzzing with messages from venture capitalists. And for the first time in years, I felt something stir inside me that was not anger or pain. It was power. Not the kind that shouts, not the kind that wins fights. The kind that waits, the kind that sees, the kind that builds. I leaned back, feeling the cool air on my skin. They thought they had erased me. But I had just begun writing myself back in. The next week, Lena drove me downtown under the pretense of a routine checkup. By the 6th month, I had enough recordings, enough bruises, and enough resolve to know this couldn't continue. We parked not at the clinic, but in front of a small law office tucked between a bakery and a thrift shop. The nameplate on the door read Benjamin Rourke, attorney at law, a quiet man who once handled George's estate years ago. He remembered me immediately. "Mrs. Graves," he said softly, "you used to bring oatmeal cookies every tax season." I smiled. This time, I bring something less sweet. Inside his office, the blinds were drawn and the lights were soft. I told him everything, not just about the oxygen cord, but the neglect, the deliberate indifference, the words Ethan had said that sliced deeper than any knife. He didn't flinch. He only nodded once and said, "We'll do this properly." I leaned forward. "I want to rewrite my will." He took off his glasses. Does your family know? Not yet, I said. And I want to keep it that way. The plan was simple and cruel in its elegance. Every cent I owned, every bond, every account would transfer into a fund called Second Breath Foundation, managed jointly by Lena and a small board of elder rights advocates. Its purpose: to help seniors who were neglected, silenced, or abandoned by their families. Lena tried to protest. Grandma, you don't have to give it all away. I looked at her, steady. I'm not giving it away, I'm giving it meaning. And then came the clause, the one that would haunt Ethan long after I was gone. It read, "Any individual proven to have tampered with my medical equipment or deprived me of care shall be permanently disinherited and denied access to any material, financial, or familial benefit derived from my estate." Benjamin looked up from the paper. That's very specific. I like precision, I said. I was an accountant. Over the following weeks, I gathered evidence like a woman sewing her own armor. The house was a minefield of words, and my recorders caught them all. The one that sealed everything came late one evening, when Ethan stumbled into the kitchen after a night out. I heard the clink of a beer bottle, the lazy shuffle of his feet, then his voice, gruff and slurred. "One more tank," he muttered to Darla. "One more oxygen bill and we're broke. Mom's tougher than a Nokia battery." Darla sighed. "Ethan, please." "What? It's true. She's like a cockroach with good credit. Just won't die." I played that recording for Benjamin the next morning. He pressed his lips together, disgust flashing behind his polite demeanor. "That's enough," he said. "You've got everything you need." We drew up the new documents quietly, notarized under the condition of privacy. He filed them in a sealed folder to be released only upon my death or upon my written instruction. Lena helped me organize the rest: medical forms, passwords, insurance statements. I gave her a small key. "This is for a lockbox in the bank," I told her. "If something happens to me, you open it with Mr. Rourke." She hesitated. "What's in it?" "Proof," I said, "of everything." At home, I went about my days as though nothing had changed. Ethan still grumbled about bills, Max still laughed at me under his breath, and Darla still folded laundry like it was a prayer. But I knew the truth. Every cruel word they spoke, every thoughtless act, they were tightening their own noose. I began recording more strategically. I would ask innocent questions like, "Do you ever worry I'll live too long?" and let them answer themselves into condemnation. Ethan once said, "Mom, nobody wants you gone. We just want you to make it easier for everyone." "Easier?" I asked softly. "Yeah," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "Maybe skip a few oxygen sessions." I smiled then, because that was the moment I knew he had no idea the kind of paperwork precision his mother was capable of. I compiled everything: audio files, time-stamped notes, receipts showing I paid for the very tank he cursed. I sent encrypted copies to both Lena and Benjamin. A second set went to a secure drive labeled "Breathe in case of emergency." One night, as I sat alone with the soft hum of the oxygen beside me, I looked around my small, windowless room. It should have felt like a prison, but instead, it felt like a war room. The sound of the machine no longer seemed pathetic. It was steady, determined, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Ethan passed by the door. He had his phone in hand, the glow lighting up his face. He stopped for a second, looked at me, and said, "You know, Mom, when you're gone, I'll finally get to breathe easy." I didn't respond. I just smiled faintly and said, "So will I." He walked off, muttering. That night, I wrote one final line in my diary before sliding it into the lockbox. Justice does not always shout. Sometimes it signs its name quietly on page 4 of a legal document. The next morning, Lena came to visit. I handed her a sealed envelope with a trembling hand. "Keep this safe," I said. She frowned. "What is it?" "It's the future," I told her, "and the past, finally balancing its books." From that day on, I breathed differently, not out of weakness, but out of patience. Every breath I took was an investment. Every silence, a signature. They didn't know it, But the will was already written, the evidence already stored, and their inheritance already gone. I didn't need revenge. I had paperwork. The moment Lena hit send on the folder marked second breath evidence, the silence that had wrapped around our house for so long finally broke like a dam that had held back not just water, but truth. Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office reached out to Benjamin. Elder abuse, medical negligence, fraud. The charges were being considered. But it was not the law that struck first. It was TikTok. Lena, quiet and furious, had shared one clip, just one. It was a short audio recording, paired with a still photo of my hand, curled around the unplugged oxygen hose. The caption read, "When your dad unplugs your grandma to charge his iPhone." The sound was clear. Ethan's voice, casual, laughing. "She's lived long enough. If she goes now, we're not even in the red." And Lena's voice, trembling. "You're talking about your mother." The internet exploded. Within a day, the hashtag #BreathForGrandma trended globally. Women in their 50s shared stories of being ignored, dismissed, mistreated by the very children they raised. Young people posted clips with captions like, "Protect the women who raised us." Nurses, caregivers, strangers across the country lit candles and left oxygen tanks at local courthouses in tribute. Ethan tried to deny it, claimed it was a joke taken out of context. But context has never sounded so cold. Darla stopped going to work after the third day. News vans were parked across the street. Reporters knocked twice, then backed away when Ethan cursed at them from the porch. Max deleted all his social media. Lena told me he started therapy the week after. He had stopped speaking in full sentences and once asked her quietly, "Am I going to end up like Dad?" I cried for that boy, not because he had called me a screensaver, but because I now saw the environment that had trained him to laugh at pain. Ethan was fired from his job. Officially, it was pending investigation into ethical misconduct. Unofficially, no one wanted to be associated with the man who unplugged his mother for phone battery. Darla filed for separation quietly, packed 2 suitcases, and left one morning with Max. She never said goodbye. She did not need to. And through it all, I stayed in my chair, breathing, listening. Then, one day, the producers from a major news network reached out to Lena. They asked for a statement. They wanted me on camera. I declined the studio interview, but agreed to send a video from my porch, under the pink glow of a Florida morning. Lena set up her phone. I brushed my hair, wore the pearl earrings George gave me on our 40th anniversary, and looked straight into the lens. And I spoke. "My name is Helen Graves. I am 82 years old. I raised 3 children, buried one, loved deeply, and paid my debts with labor and silence. I did not expect parades. I did not expect gold. I only expected a chair in the corner and air to breathe." I paused. They took the chair, and then they tried to take the air. The silence in the video was thick. You could hear the wind, the soft click of my oxygen machine. "I do not need to scream," I said. "I just need you to hear the sound of me being silenced, and to understand what that silence costs." When Lena posted the full video, it was shared over 2 million times in 3 days. Elder advocacy groups reached out. A senator quoted me on the Senate floor. A bill was introduced, Helen's Law, calling for stronger protections for elders in home care settings. My face, lined and pale, appeared on late-night TV, not for vanity, but for validation. I was not forgotten. I was not erased. Ethan, on the other hand, was summoned to court. A civil suit first, then the criminal charges began to take shape. Lena submitted every audio clip, every photo, every medical report. Ethan tried to play the victim. I was stressed. I was broke. She manipulated me. But America had heard enough. You do not unplug someone's life and then blame the electric bill. One morning, a handwritten letter came in the mail from a woman in Kentucky. She wrote, "My granddaughter saw your video. She asked if I ever felt like that. We cried together. Thank you for making room for our stories." Another came from Seattle. "I thought I was alone. I'm not. You reminded me I still have breath, and with it, a voice." Lena sat beside me, reading them out loud. And for the first time in years, my lungs did not feel like a burden. They felt like an instrument. My voice did not echo across one room. It echoed across a country. They all thought I was dead. It was almost funny the way they showed up to Benjamin Rourke's office, dressed in somber shades, Darla clutching tissues like a grieving widow, Ethan in a black shirt that still had the department store tag tucked into the collar. Max wore earbuds, chewing gum like it was just another day he was forced to endure. The receptionist led them to the conference room with the long walnut table. Lena and Benjamin were already seated. Ethan glanced around, clearly confused. No casket? No urn? Benjamin folded his hands. There's been a misunderstanding. Mrs. Graves is not deceased. Darla gasped. Max took out one earbud. Ethan frowned. What the hell is this? Lena pressed play. The screen flickered to life. There I was, sitting in my favorite chair, the one with the crocheted blanket Lena made me. I looked right into the camera. Alive, breathing, unapologetically so. If you're hearing this, I began, you were expecting silence, perhaps even a little celebration, but I'm still here, and so is the truth. Darla reached for her tissue box. Ethan clenched his jaw. Ethan, I said slowly, you once told your son I was like a cockroach with good credit. You joked that unplugging my oxygen was a financial strategy. You stole air from my lungs to charge your phone, and now you think you deserve something from me? You broke the most sacred contract, my breath, for your convenience. But convenience ends. My will echo longer than your silence. Benjamin passed a printed document across the table. Effective immediately, he read. Ethan Graves is disinherited. Furthermore, he is legally required to repay all funds transferred to his personal accounts under the pretense of elder care, totaling $72,840. Ethan stood up. This is a joke. She's senile. You can't enforce this. Benjamin raised a brow. The recordings say otherwise. Ethan turned to Darla. Say something. But she looked away. The video continued. Darla, I said gently, I don't believe you were cruel. But you watched. You heard me struggle, and you folded laundry. You saw bruises and stayed silent. Silence is not innocence when it stands beside cruelty. Benjamin handed Darla a sealed envelope. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note. Her eyes scanned it. Her lips parted, but no words came. Max, curious, leaned over her shoulder to read. His face paled. Benjamin turned next. Max Graves, he said evenly, you are not included in the disinheritance. However, your grandmother has made one request. He slid a printed page to Max. A single paragraph. Max read aloud. Before any contact with elderly individuals, especially me, you must complete a certified empathy and elder care program, including psychological counseling. You are not a lost cause, but you must choose to be better. Max blinked. For once, no jokes. No earbuds. Benjamin turned back to the screen. My voice softened. To the world, I was just an old woman, a burden, an afterthought. But to one person in this room, I was still something sacred. I smiled. Lena, you asked questions when no one wanted answers. You brought me warm food when all I was given was silence. You held my hand when it shook, and my secrets when they were heavier than I could carry. Lena's eyes filled with tears. Benjamin placed a thick file in front of her. The Second Breath Foundation is now fully funded. Your grandmother has named you sole executor of her estate. All remaining assets, financial, real, and otherwise, transfer to your stewardship. Ethan laughed bitterly. So that's it? She just gave it all to Lena? Benjamin smiled faintly. She gave it to someone who listened. The room fell into silence. Then, the video ended. But not before I said one last thing. I used to think my final breath would be a quiet thing, a fading out. But now I see it can be a message, a signature, a refusal to vanish. You wanted me gone. But I will echo in every page of that will, in every life the foundation helps, in every woman who watches this and realizes her silence has power too. Benjamin closed the laptop. Meeting adjourned. No one moved. Ethan looked at Max. Max looked at the floor. Darla held the letter like it had weight. Lena stood. "Come on, Grandma's waiting for me." And with that, she walked out while the rest of them remained behind, in a room full of what could have been, staring at a table where their names were supposed to be, but weren't. 1 year later, I no longer needed a machine to breathe. I lived with Lena on a modest stretch of land just outside Homestead, Florida. The air smelled like citrus and rain. There was a rocking chair on the porch that creaked when the wind blew just right. That sound used to irritate me. Now, it reminded me I was still here, and I could breathe however loudly I wanted. My days were simple. I watered the marigolds, fed the chickens, worked on the final chapters of my memoir, The Cost of Silence. My handwriting had grown shaky, but Lena found it charming. "It looks like the truth trembled its way onto the page," she said once, brushing my hand with hers. Lena was rarely home for long stretches. The Second Breath Foundation had become far more than we imagined. What started as one building with 12 beds now had 5 satellite locations, dozens of volunteers, and a waiting list of elders who had nowhere else to go. In its first year, the foundation housed 127 abandoned seniors. Some came from hospital hallways, others from adult children who dropped them off like coats at a party they no longer cared to attend. Every one of them found warmth, food, and someone to sit with while they remembered who they used to be. Lena stood on stages now. She gave TED Talks, testified before Congress. She wore the pearl earrings I once wore to George's retirement dinner, and every time I saw her on the screen, I felt 20 years younger. She spoke not just about me, but about all of us, the invisible, the discarded, the silent. She called us the generation that gave breath and was choked for it. Back in Miami-Dade Correctional, Ethan read about her success from a newspaper someone had left behind in the common area. An article with her photo, arms around 2 elderly women beaming like teenagers. Below the headline, "Second Breath Saved Me." He read it cover to cover, then again. He told a fellow inmate she was just doing it for attention. But even he didn't believe it anymore. Attention could never buy the kind of reverence Lena had earned. The following week, he received a letter, handwritten, my name on the return address. The envelope smelled faintly of lavender. Inside, it read, "Ethan, you were wrong. I didn't die when you unplugged my oxygen. I took my breath back to speak one final truth. You thought I'd fade away, like air escaping a cracked window. But I stayed, and I turned every gasp into a record, every silence into a sentence, every insult into instruction for a new world where women like me don't vanish. You lost me the day you laughed at my breath, but I found myself again in every soul you couldn't silence." He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. He never spoke of it again. And me? I watched the sun dip behind the barn each evening, a slow golden bow that reminded me how gracefully endings could arrive. Sometimes, Lena would sit beside me, sipping tea, watching the twilight. "Do you ever miss the noise?" she asked once. I shook my head. "No," I said. "Silence saved me. It taught me how to listen, how to plan, how to survive." She reached for my hand. "You changed everything." I looked at her, smiling. I just remembered who I was. My breath, once a tether to a machine, had become a banner, a message. And my final words? They were not whispered. They were written, signed, read aloud to a world that had once looked away. Because in the end, they thought I breathed just to survive. But I breathed to prove that even a quiet old woman could make a generation bow its head. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe that even the quietest voices deserve to be heard, then join us. There are more stories like Helen's. Stories of strength, silence, sacrifice, and justice. Hit that subscribe button to follow Grandma True Stories, where every week a new voice rises from the shadows to remind the world. Revenge has no expiration date. Wisdom doesn't shout, it remembers. Thank you for listening. And remember, when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens.